This is a podcast about our lived experience, which unfortunately includes infant death and subsequent mental health struggles. Please take good care of yourself and only listen if this content feels safe for you right now. We'll still be here when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Judith.
And I'm Alina. We are internet friends turned real-life friends who both experienced the tragic loss of our sons to sudden infant death syndrome in winter of 2021.
In the year after Aiden died, my husband and I both became unemployed. My parents divorced, and we had to move 5 times for various reasons.
And as for me, just a few weeks before my son Quinn died, my then husband had come out to me as a transgender woman, and we're subsequently divorcing.
It's been a lot.
It's been a lot.
But as long as we're living, we will love our sons deeply and work to make sure that we live a life that makes them proud.
Welcome to As Long As I'm Living podcast.
We're so glad you're here.
Hi, Judith.
So, Judith, this is Carol. Carol, this is Judith.
It's so nice to meet you, Judith. I'm so sorry that you're part of this shitty ass club.
I am too. I wish I wasn't.
Yeah, it's the worst. It's the
that'd be great.
It's the most terrible reason to know someone.
It is, but it's such a pleasure to meet you because I've heard so many wonderful things about you, and I'm really excited to learn more.
I mean, thank goodness we all know each other, right?
I know. Or else it would really be a lonely, lonely road.
That's why I made up Empty Arms.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, hi, everybody. Welcome to As Long As I'm Living. We have a very special guest for you today. This is our first non-spouse guest. So we've interviewed my ex, Kaylee, who you guys know. We've interviewed Judith's husband, but this is our first non-spouse guest, and I am so excited for you guys to meet her. Carol, why don't you introduce yourself?
So I'm Carol McMurrich, and I'm the founder and director of Empty Arms Bereavement Support, and I am the mom of Charlotte Amelia. Charlotte was my first daughter, who was born in May of 2003 and died during labor from oxygen deprivation. And my experience with Charlotte made me feel very driven to create community and understanding and increase awareness around pregnancy and infant loss everywhere.
Thank you. We are so happy to have you. So first, I'm going to have you start off by telling us a little bit about Empty Arms, why you founded it, and the services you provide.
So Empty Arms, I wanted to create a resource that would network people to each other so that people would actually have humans that they could talk to and connect with and be face-to-face with. And I also wanted a network where people hopefully would have to do as little work as possible to actually access the resource. So if in the hospital systems that we work in, we ask providers, please have us reach out to the person. Don't give the person our card. Have the person give you their information and give it to us. So we call them and say, we're so sorry that this happened. How can we be there for you? So there's 3 things that Empty Arms does. 15 years ago, things were in the works for just one support group. And it was obviously a face-to-face support group because there's no video conferencing 15 years ago. And it was just for people in Western Mass. And so it was just one group. And now aided by just the community, because everything that we've created is totally, the origin of everything is just us feeling out what is it that people need and how can we make that happen? We have sort of 3 components. One is the component where we're visiting people actually in the hospital in all up the Connecticut River Valley. So we serve all of the hospitals, kind of up the Connecticut River corridor. And so that means when someone's baby dies in the hospital, we are able to go in and meet them immediately and help them get those things that they need. And it's not quite as dependent on whether or not they have a good nurse, because they have somebody else who's holding the staff accountable to make sure that those things happen. And we can get more and better stuff for them. And we know things when I am working with a baby and I have the baby wrapped in one blanket and then I switch out the blanket, because I, for whatever reason, I'm like putting that blanket in a black bag to go home with the parents, because I know that like every single thing that touches that baby needs to go home. And, I'm just trying to give them like as much as they possibly can to like that's tangible. And so that's one component. That's like our in the hospital component. And then our in the community component is following those people that we serve in the hospital, and then doing outreach to anywhere we could potentially come in contact with people, and running these groups, which were in our office, but are now on Zoom. And we run like 9 groups a month. And I have 9 right now, but like I have like 3 that I want to like open in the next 2 months. So it's like, there feels like limitless potential for all of the different categories of things that people want to just lean into. So running these groups, which is there are these like very structured, but yet very open, trauma-informed, safe environments where people just get to be together with this common thread and this like deep reverence for the fact that people's stories are profoundly different, but there are so many common threads of socially what it is like to be a parent without a baby in this culture, and so many common threads to the things that people struggle with in just figuring out how to live with this grief. And that's been, those are very, very powerful, and really strong relationships come out of that. Certainly also in the community support aspect of things, I do a lot of like just one-to-one introductions for people, like, oh, I just, somebody new, I just met her in the hospital last week, and like there's these pieces of her story that remind me of these other people that I know that kind of live near her, and so I'm going to do that intro and like get them connected. And I love that piece of just like getting people to know each other. And then the last piece is education, which is kind of, I don't want to say it's like my favorite part, because I actually love, of course, just like chilling with the parents. It's been so incredible for me to build this network, which is so self-serving because I have a network of friends now too. But the nurses and doctors, and I really think the nurses, for bedside care are the most important, because they have the most face time with patients. They have little to no training in how to deal with this. They have little to no training in how to manage people, in like what kinds of things are important. They have little to no training in like, what is possible. And they're learning it on the fly. They're learning it from one another, if at all. And so that means that if you learn it from somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing, then you're learning the wrong things. And I don't want them learning it from each other. I want them learning it from us. I want them learning it from us, who can say like, these are the 4 things that happened in my interaction with the healthcare system. And like, we're interacting with the healthcare system in all different ways. Like, you guys were interacting with like paramedics and emergency room staff. And like, what were the ways in which there may have been people who interacted with you in those moments who affected you in a way that somehow buoyed you in a time of like total and utter chaos and trauma? And where are there places where you're just like, did you really have to pour salt on that wound in that moment? Like, could you not have phrased that differently, or created space for me, where it was denied? And a lot of the things that we try to teach people to do are not complicated. They don't cost money. They don't take time. They're just not things that are intuitive to people, because their discomfort with babies dying is so enormous. And I feel like that work of getting in there and teaching professionals ahead of time just feels so important to me, because I know that it's going to have an impact down the road. Because people, their reaction when a baby dies is terror, right? When they hear that that baby is coming in, they are terrified. And so if they have a little bullet point list in the back of their brain that they learned in a class one time, they're pulling that list up and they're going to try to remember everything that was on it. Like, this is not wasted time in trying to teach people. They want the information. So I love being able to provide that.
Yeah. So Carol is one of the first people that I talked to after Quinn died. I think I sent you an email and I was like, my son died. What do I do? I was like,
I think you sent me an email 2 days after he died.
Yes, it was right then. And Judith is the same. She's like, we were both like taking care of all this logistical stuff. We were like, we need to find support groups. We need to find like a study, like all this stuff. But yeah, I emailed you and I was like, what do I do? And I think I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about like, as you are like the front lines for people who have just lost their baby. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about like support people in general, not like healthcare providers, like how can they support people in those really, really early days when literally they are not even really alive. They're not even there. How can family and friends support people in those really early days?
So I think that there are a couple of things that are like in the forefront of my mind when I think about that. I think the first thing that everybody has to really step back from is any interactions that try to guide the way that the person is like processing or relating to their grief process and their relationship with that baby. The only person who can be in charge of that is the person experiencing it. So there is a huge range of ways that people will react to the death of their baby. And there is a huge range of needs that people will have afterwards. And I could say that like probably 99.9% of those things are totally normal. So, when you see your person catatonic on the couch and they don't want to answer your, questions about whether they want to eat or not, you can just let them be catatonic on the couch. And you can say to them, like, I'm here for you and I'm just going to let you be. And I'm going to check in with you, every hour and make sure that there isn't a way that I can be helping you, but I see that this is what you need right now.
I feel like the food thing, the most irritating thing in the world. Like I get angry even thinking about it now. People were so obsessed with feeding me.
That's right.
Everyone was just obsessed with feeding me. They kept like telling me to take more bites of soup. And I was like, I don't want to.
Could probably all go for like 2 weeks without actually eating much and be fine. So I think that, like letting people just be, and it's scary. It's so scary to see the person that you love disappear. And essentially for almost everybody, the people that really care about you are going to feel like you are gone because you are gone. Like the part of you as a person before this baby died is gone for now. And a new version of you is going to reemerge, and there are going to be a lot of parts that are the same and there are going to be a lot of parts that are different. And then the second thing that I think is so important is when you want to help, you have to list the options. You can't just say that you're there. You have to give the menu. You have to say, these are the things I could do for you right now. Or I would like to do this. Is that okay? I would like to make you dinner. Would you like the dinner to be delivered at 5 o'clock or in the morning? Would you like the dinner to be put directly into your freezer, or would you like me to bring you a dinner that you can eat today? Don't say, what can I do? Because nobody knows what they want somebody to do. Say, I'm going to go to the store for you. I'm going to buy you salad, milk, and cheese. What else should I add to that list? Right? Not like, what do you want me to get for you? But like, I am at the store. I am buying you things. Right? So being like almost like, and even though I know that you just said like people were forcing you to eat soup and that was annoying, like I think that on the other hand, like there are places where you do kind of just have to be like, I'm helping, but you have to also make sure that you offer the option for people to receive the help in a way that is not intrusive.
I think one thing that would be helpful for me is that people would help the people around me. Like, the people around me, like my mom or whoever, the closest people, my husband, they needed help. To help them would be helping me. To feed them is feeding me.
That's right.
To care for them is caring for me. And they are better equipped to tell you, like, my mom is better equipped to tell you what she could benefit from than I am right now. So I would say one thing that I think would be helpful is like, say, I'm going to drop off food for your entire family, because I know that your family at time, and I'll coordinate with your mom. Don't even ask me. Don't even like if I'm like not even like I'm not even useful.
2 people brought food and they didn't knock on the door, and then they just called and said, I left food on your porch.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So then it wasn't like I have to have this interaction with someone. And I think that you should do that if you're going, if you're doing the shopping, say, I'm going to pick some things up for you, but I'm going to leave them outside. Like, certainly if you want a visit, I would be happy to come in and keep you company. But, I'm guessing that right now it would be more helpful for me to just leave it. So like respecting that space, but then also like, I think that I've heard from a lot of parents, and I know that this is true for me, especially for people, when your baby dies and never comes home, nobody knows your baby. Yeah. And so I had some people, I have a friend who's a midwife who said to me, like, when you're ready, I would love to sit down with you and hear Charlotte's whole birth story. And I remember thinking, like, that's the best thing anyone has said to me since the day she was born, is like they wanted to know about her. And they wanted to like find out more about her so that they could know her like I knew her.
I've talked about this in support groups, and I think I've even talked about this on the podcast, but it is so painful for me that every story about my child is about a dead baby. Mm-hmm. Like, he's also just my baby. And so when I get to talk about him as my baby, it is so special to me because it's so unusual,
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. Like creating those opportunities. And I think that, when I talk to healthcare providers, and this also is true for parents and support people, there are a lot of ways in which you can ask parents questions that opens a door where they're either allowed to walk through it or they can choose not to. Mm-hmm. For example, if you say this, if I were to say to you, like, Alina, did Quinn look like you? Like, you could just answer yes. Or you could be like, oh my God, he was so beautiful. Like, he had big blue eyes just like me. And, like, you could go on for 15 minutes if that is the invitation that you need to just talk about what Quinn looks like. But it's not necessarily like, I think people are afraid to ask any question because they have that, like, they like have this like delusional notion that like, we're like no longer thinking about the kid. And if they say their name, we're going to suddenly be like, oh my God, my baby died, and like burst into hysterical tears. Right? They don't realize that this is just like part of our DNA now. And like, there's no way that you could possibly like surprise us with the knowledge, and that in more ways than one, any question is a welcome question. Yeah. Because it like acknowledges and validates our living reality as parents of a baby that's not living.
Yeah. Yeah. I am just wondering if there are some common threads you've heard over the years that you've done all of this work. Are there common threads that it feels like this is all stuff that parents feel when their baby dies? Like, what are the common threads? Because I'm guessing our listeners, like, they've heard me and Judith talk about our stuff, but those are just 2 individual people's experience.
Yeah. It's actually like the longer time goes by, the more like fascinating it is for me to work with people, especially because you can imagine that like the way in which I'm talking to people is not typical conversational style in the beginning, because it's like I'm listening, I'm not inserting myself into their conversation. And so I find myself just like fascinated by how easy it is for me to know exactly what someone's about to say, because they start to say something and I'm like, oh, this is the thing that you're about to launch into. I know exactly what you're going to say. And so, I like, if I'm thinking like in chronological order, like when people talk about the experience of like their baby dying, or finding out that their baby like did die or will die, like people talk about feeling like I'm watching myself in a movie. I felt like I was out of my body. Like I felt like my head was full of fog. Like the ways in which people describe their relationship to themselves, like in that moment of like dissociation from the life that you thought you were going to have. And then all of a sudden, like something else is starting to happen that you have no control over. Like that experience, I find people describe like with remarkable consistency. And then there are a lot of really consistent ways in which people struggle with relationships. So, most people come to me or to support groups when they, like the first time that they find out that somebody who's close to them is having a baby, where you have somebody tell you something that is supposed to be good news, and you know intellectually that like it's supposed to be happy news and that you should be happy for them, and all you feel is like gutted
rage.
And devastated and rage, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. Like my sister's having a baby and now I hate her. And you haven't experienced it enough to understand that like you don't actually hate your sister. Like it has nothing to do with your sister, has nothing to do with her baby, and has everything to do with the fact that like you are heartbroken and miss your baby and want your baby back again, right? And so, that conversation is so hard. Conversations with people about going back to work and like what they're worried about going back to work. And, a lot of people will call me kind of at or talk about this in group, like I'm starting to go out more and like I am struggling with a question like, how many children do you have? Like, how do you answer that question? And so like, that's a script that goes over and over and over and over again. And like, of course, the answer is like, for most people, it depends who you're talking to, and it depends what kind of a day you're having, and it depends who you are and how like private versus public you feel, like how much like your scales of anxiety versus like the anxiety of people not knowing you're a mother versus the anxiety of facing people's discomfort. Like everybody has their own little scale where like, in one moment you're like, I don't even care. I just want everyone to know about him. And in the other moment, you're like, I can't deal with the look on your face if I tell you that I have this kid and I'm never even going to see you again anyway. So forget it. I'm just going to just not say anything and keep walking. Right? I mean, there's all kinds of ways that this happens. And just like everybody benefits so much from, we don't have like a mirror for ourselves of like, with so much of life, and you two have both parented a newborn, and you know what this is like when you have a newborn baby, and like you don't know what to do when you bring your newborn baby home, but like you have books to read and you've like seen people parent on television, and like maybe you've seen your friend parent, and you can go to a baby group and like look around, and you just kind of you're like picking little like tidbits up about like, here's what you might do when your baby cries a lot.
Mm-hmm. And you have so many examples that you can be like, oh, that person did this. That doesn't look good for me, for my baby, but that other person did that, and that's great. But then when the baby dies, you're like, who do I look at?
Right. You've got nothing. And so like, I think that to me, that's what's like, so, I mean, even one person is valuable, but to me, that's the thing that is like so rich about the support group, is that you get people, somebody might come in, of course, this is like another thing, like, what do I do with the baby's stuff? And, I don't know what to do with my baby's things. And
we have an episode about that, listeners, if you're curious.
Right. One person in the circle is going to say, oh, like my nursery is my shrine, and like everything is perfect and it's totally intact, and I love going in there and touching all of the things. And another person's going to say like, everything was like, it still had its tags on. I like literally packed it all in the car the next day and took it back to Target, and like was totally happy to like get rid of it. I yelled at the salesperson, was like, my fucking baby died, give me all my money back. They like turned pale white, like started throwing dollars at me to get me out of their store, and so you get these like stories and these role models that basically, I think the sum total of like what I hope people take away is like, oh, I get to do whatever the hell I want. Like whatever the thing is that like I need to do to make it through the next 5 minutes, like that is the thing that I'm supposed to be doing right now.
We're only two people, and I think if neither Judith or I, we kind of grieve similarly. And so I think it'll be helpful for people to hear like, this is, because I'm sure they'll recognize themselves in what you just talked about. And, they're going to be like, oh, that's like me.
It's crazy, like the similarities and also like the range of like the ways in which people survive. And it really is. It's survival. And it really, it's like a restart that you didn't ask for. And so you're just so discombobulated.
I know. It's a wild time. I remember
like, I don't remember at all the first support group I went to. I remember what I was wearing, but I don't remember any of it because I was just like, you know, completely beside myself. But I remember leaving that group. I do remember distinctly just feeling so grateful to have known Quinn. Mm-hmm. And I think there was something about hearing everybody else's stories and hearing them talk about the love they had for their babies. Like, it just gave me this, like, I was just so reminded of my overwhelming love for him. Like, I felt like I had been so caught up in the grief of him not being there and the sadness and everything. Like, it was nice to, and I still feel that way when I go to group. I'm just like, it's so nice. And I feel that way recording this podcast. It's so nice to talk about him and have permission, give myself permission to like spend time, really dedicated time thinking about him and talking about him. It's so wonderful.
That is totally the thing that I just like cherish so much about our organization. And not just, I mean, I shouldn't even say organization, it's community. It's like all of the people, because it gives everybody, like everyone who comes in, they're there because they're the parent of that baby. And it's the only place for many people where they're seen like first and foremost as the parent of that child, right? And never forget.
Interestingly, not as the parent of that dead child, as the parent of that child, which is, you would think that wouldn't be true, but it really feels like you're just the parent of a child. And all these people happen to have dead children, but they're just parents of children and you have something in common.
Right, exactly. And like, I don't ever think like, it's like borderline like preposterous to me to imagine that like in other places out in the world, like these people that come in with these like very complex, complicated, deep, life-altering relationships with these babies are not considered parents.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's just weird. Like it's very much shifts your identity.
Absolutely does. I want to talk to you about, because I've been to many different support groups. I want to talk to you about the philosophy of the Empty Arms support groups, because I feel like it's different than the other ones I've been to, in that like the spaces, well, I'll let you talk about it, but it has a different vibe.
I want to know what the vibe is. Like, I'm curious.
It feels like you can say anything. It feels like I have never once in that group felt as though anybody was judging anybody else for having a different experience. It's also very open-ended. I did a support group that was 6 weeks long, and each week had a topic. And, you know, the facilitator was teaching us about a topic, and it was helpful, but it was also not, it didn't feel like a support group. It felt like a grief education class. And it's also been so nice that the facilitator is a bereaved mom herself.
Yes.
And that you're so much further along in the journey. Like it feels, I think one of the things I like about it is that it's not just newly bereaved parents or people at my exact stage of the grief process. Like, it feels good to me to go to the support group and be able to help people who are freshly bereaved, and for me to see people who are 3 years out and see how they're doing, you know, now that I'm 1 year out. That feels so nice that it's a huge community over the course of whatever phase they're at. I love that about it. So tell me about your philosophy and how you run the support groups, because it's different than the other ones I've been in.
You just like basically named the philosophy. I love it. So the first thing is it is peer support. It's peer facilitated, and that's like a mandatory, like that's the most mandatory part of our facilitator profiles for all our groups, is that they're all peer facilitated, because it's that lends authenticity that is impossible to find.
Yes.
And I think all of us have had experiences where we have been with professionals who we trust and then lost that trust because we realized like they don't actually know what this really feels like. And I think having facilitators who do know what it really feels like really changes the tone of the group. And part of the reason why that is because your goals are different. So your facilitator of your 6-week group who had the little menu of 6 topics to get through and was teaching you about grief, that's great. That's a style of group that has a specific purpose and function, definitely has a role and can be really, really helpful and informative. But the role that it serves is like a purpose-driven goal. It's like, we are going to help people to understand the process that they're going through in 6 sessions, and with the goal being that they will understand, I've got these teaching points that I want to get through.
Yep.
That is not the way that our groups work. Our groups actually operate with the underlying goal of basically like brutal honesty breeds brutal honesty.
Yeah.
And the idea that like we have the opportunity to witness each other, like in our raw state.
Yeah.
And there is nothing that is more empowering to each individual person than being able to like be their own vulnerable, raw, emotional, traumatized self in the presence of other people and be witnessed. And then in turn, be able to witness the same thing of other people.
Yeah.
And that loops me back also to the peer facilitator model, because the model that we use for facilitation also requires that the facilitators like begin with their own emotional content. And so like one of the things that you know is that like our circles always begin with the facilitators sharing their own story and sharing some of their own emotional content. And, as someone like, my story is 18 years old. And so I will often say, I remember feeling this way, and over time it has shifted to this, because I am also trying to serve as that role model, right? So my job is to both share relatable content that's going to make Alina say like, oh my God, she does get this. She does know what it feels like to like lay on the couch for 9 days in a row and never eat because she's too sad to eat.
Yeah.
Oh, but she doesn't feel like that. She never lays on the couch anymore. That's good. Like, it's good to know that somehow you can get from point A to point B. And I can also honestly say, which I think lends credibility to our support groups, like, I don't even freaking know how I got from there to here. Like, I just got out of bed every day and like put on my socks and kept going. And somehow things shifted. So what I did is exactly what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
I just showed up for myself every day and did the best that I could.
It's almost like you were saying those other groups are purpose driven and this is a process driven group.
It's totally process driven. And I like to think that there's a way, and it's not explicit. I mean, we do say it explicitly, I guess, in some ways, but like, there is no human on earth that knows what you need more than you. And I think sometimes groups, and this can happen in therapy too, groups that are, professionally facilitated by somebody who's like a social worker or a psychologist who's not a bereaved parent, like there can be a sense that like, you know more about this process than I do and you're guiding me. And our philosophy is like, you are guiding you. Like we're all teaching each other in this circle and you're your guide. And we really hope that you'll learn things from this circle that will help you to guide you better. But like nobody's ever going to guide you for you. And like when it comes right down to it, like we are the only people who can rescue ourselves. There's no one who does this work for us ever, no matter what our support structure is, no matter who we have on our team, we do this for ourselves. We are the only people that can like heal ourselves over time. Right. And I think that like, that's scary, but
empowering.
It's empowering, and empowering when you're able to kind of come to understand that in the context of a community of people who are all in their own stages of the same struggle. Right.
That's right. Yeah.
Because you have all these different role models.
Yeah. Okay. So what's next for Empty Arms?
Oh, wow. The list is really long. So right now, I think that, one thing I would like to just precede what I'm about to say with is that Empty Arms is like such a work in progress. Like there is nothing about Empty Arms that feels at all organized, put together, finished. it's constantly changing and shifting and growing because, you know, our community isn't, you know, that like 6-week session that you went to means that people are moving in and out of that, whatever that was. But like people aren't, there's a lot of people that move in and don't leave. Mm-hmm. And that's great. That's the goal, right? The goal is that like, you know, in 5 years, when somebody comes to me and says like, I just lost my 4-month-old to SIDS, I'm like, I'm going to have Alina call you and you're going to call them and you're going to be that person for them. And like, that's what I want to foster is like, for people who really get a lot out of this, like being able to like be that person who like forges the friendship from the other side is like so amazing. So we get bigger, but then as we get bigger, it enables us to be able to like create more subgroups because we have cohorts for those subgroups. So, you know, for example, when we first started, people that had terminated for medical reasons were just like looped into our regular bereavement group. And there wasn't a group specific to that because we only had at any given time, like maybe 1 or possibly 2 people. And like, that's not a group. But then over time, we started to get like more and more and more people. And so then it was like, oh, well, we can actually have this just be a group. Mm-hmm. And so, certainly we have like a plenty of groups that we want to have on the menu. I would say that probably one of the things that we have needed to do for a long time, and we just don't really have enough facilitators. And I really want peer facilitators that have had a lot of experience with other bereaved parents, because I want them to be able to have that like full spectrum view of like what's possible and what's normal. And, you know, I would love to have a trying to conceive group that's separate from our subsequent choices group so that we could really give separate attention to people that are like launching into like thinking about having a baby versus people who are actually like 5 months pregnant and wanting to know, like, what do I say to my doctor at my next appointment? Because those are currently like mixed spaces, and it's just a challenging balance to strike. I feel like that's the group that I work the hardest in as a facilitator, to like try to feel like I'm like meeting everyone's needs and making sure that like the conversation is applicable to all the people in the room. And like, there's a lot of things that like whirl through your head when you're facilitating. You're always like thinking about like everybody at the table and like, is that relevant to them? And like, what question could I ask to like weave this person in? And I would love to have a separate LGBTQ plus group that just, you know, like gives some credit to the fact that like the experience of parenting in a same-sex couple or as a trans person like carries with it like additional challenges and burdens that like a straight couple does not have. And so I want to be able to have there be a space where we're saying like, we honor this, like we see that this is part of your journey and we want to give you like a place where that's dedicated to speak to it. And then a huge piece of where we're going is that in the last 2 years, we hugely expanded our like geographical region of service for our in-hospital programs and looped in Bay State Medical Center, which has tripled our caseload of people that we see in the hospital, actually like even more than tripled. So and that is like a way more diverse community. So we have a lot of Latinx, a lot of people of color, a lot of people who live in poverty and have other just like socioeconomic challenges. And so we are working pretty hard to try to figure out what are the ways in which we need to change and expand what we offer so that people are able to use the services that we're offering. Yeah. So, you know, people love to talk about how accessible Zoom is. Yeah, Zoom is accessible if you have great internet. Zoom sucks if you don't have great internet. Yeah. So like our Zoom groups are actually like really not that accessible for people. It's great that they don't have to leave their house, but it's not great that their internet sucks and logging in, you know, is difficult.
And this is not the kind of thing you want to do from the library.
Absolutely not. So we're looking at like, can we get some in-person groups that are in Springfield that have, that are like on the bus line, that are in, in-person groups are challenging because we want them in neutral spaces. We don't want an in-person group in a hospital. Mm-hmm. We're not going to run an in-person group in a church. Yeah. But we also don't really have that much money. So like, I can't rent a room for like $400 a month to have one meeting in. Like, that's not going to work either. Along those same lines, like I really would like a Spanish language group, because we see a lot of people that don't really speak English, and they're not going to come to a support group that's an English-led support group that's like 3/4 populated by white women. Like, that's not appealing. Like, I think that one of the things that I inherently understand, and you do too, because you've been through this, is that like the potential to be uncomfortable in an environment like this is so huge.
Yes.
Especially like making the brave decision to try it for the first time. Yeah. And so the ways in the more ways in which we can create spaces where people feel like they're being like personally invited, and the people who are going to be there are going to be like you and have things in common with you, then that's going to increase the like emotional accessibility of the spaces. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's kind of like we're like in a position right now where we're going to be designing our strategic plan for the next 3 years. And I think our role is really looking at equity, like in terms of like, who are we serving now? What do people need? How do we deliver those things to people in ways in which they're able to receive that? And so it's going to mean a lot of talking to people that we've met, both people who have used what we've offered and people who haven't used what we've offered, just trying to figure out like, what can we be better at, and who do we need to bring in to be on our team to like deliver those resources more effectively.
Yeah.
So lots of stuff.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation.
Also, Judith, I just want to say that I feel bad that I just like yammered away at you because of the context of our conversation, and I wasn't like, tell me about your baby. I want to know all about you.
Don't even worry about him. He's good. Poor everyone else has to listen about him. You get a pass.
I want to know all about him though. So next time.
I cannot wait to see you. I'll be at the Syrup Stampede on April 3rd. I cannot wait to give you a hug.
I can't wait either. It's going to be so great. I hope you'll invite all of your family and friends to come to beautiful Northampton. All right.
Thank you so much for doing this.
You're so welcome. It was so much fun. Okay, great.
So listeners, I will link at the Empty Arms website in the show notes if you want to learn more about them. And I don't know, Carol, you have anything else you want to add before we hop off?
Just that I adore you, and I love Quinn, and I feel so overjoyed that you've found a way to just like mother him through this podcast. And I just want to congratulate you on just putting yourself out there for everyone, because what a gift.
Yeah, thank you.
To all of our wonderful new friends, we want to hear from you. Email us at aslongasimlivingpodcast@gmail.com. And follow us on Instagram at aslongasimlivingpodcast. We'll get back to you as soon as our grieving brains allow.